Hello?
Hi, can you see me and hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you see me?
Yes, everything
Good.
looks great. We just were wrapping up our great book discussion on the Postmistress,
Uh-huh.
and we're glad to have you here. This is our patrons from the Fayetteville Free Library.
Hi.
Welcome. Okay, does anyone want to jump right in with a question to start her off?
Yeah, did Murrow really have girls? Did
She's
Admiral
asking
really
about Edward R. Murrow. Did he really have women working for him on
And
staff?
if so, who were they? If we heard of them, did Martha Gellhorn work for him? Or?
No, she wasn't. So, it's a great question because, of course, he's famous for just having the Murrow boys.
Right.
But there was one woman, Mary Marvin Breckenridge, who broadcast for him for 6 months during the Blitz, and then left to go get married to a diplomat. And there were other times where people would come in and broadcast just for short shows, like Janet Flanner in Paris, other women who were already on site. But Mary Marvin Breckenridge was the only one who really did it consistently. And I didn't know about her. Frankie was a character before I checked to see whether or not it was possible. And so it was to my great delight that I discovered that she existed. And you can hear her. There are a couple of recordings of her during the Blitz.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Were any other characters in the story based on real life people that you found in your research?
No, I mean Murrow is the only one who's really, who's real. As I started to write the story, I realized that I needed to have various kinds of people. Harriet Mendelson, Frankie's roommate, I realized I wanted to have a Jewish reporter, sort of, I don't know, maybe partway through the drafting process. So she arose out of a need that I saw that I had. But everybody else is completely just made up out of my head. So.
Where did the idea for the story come from?
Well, let's think. A very long time ago, about 15 years ago, I was living in Provincetown, which is the town at the very end of the Cape, and I was working on my first novel. And Provincetown is a very small. I mean, many of you probably have been there, but it's in the wintertime, it's a small fishing village, and all the tourists leave, and so you really do have a sense of just a few people living in the outermost Cape. And so I grew very interested in the woman who ran the post office. And I was just wondering, I would think to myself, I wonder if she, does she keep our secrets? Does she know our secrets? And it occurred to me that was a really great device for a novel. So I sort of put that in the back of my head. And then when I came to write, I thought I would write a novel about a woman who withheld a letter. And I just sort of said it during World War II. And then as I through research, I mean, the other characters came. Frankie arrived. She just sort of walked off the bus into my draft. I didn't know she was coming. But I realized more and more that I wanted to write a war novel that took place off the battlefield. And so Frankie, the figure of a reporter who is actually in a situation but not a part of it, somebody who's reporting, became more and more compelling. So her story was one that I wanted to follow. And the more I researched, the more I realized I wanted to set it during a time where we were not in the war, so that there could be this kind of simultaneous sense of a world at peace and a world at war, since that was, I felt very much the kind of world I was living in as I was writing the book, which was the early 2000s.
Some of the authors that we've spoken to have told us, their novel took 5 years, 10 years. Then when they took it to the publisher said, gee, the first 86 pages were good. Can you get rid of the last 100 pages or whatever? I mean, what kind of experience did you have doing the novel? Writing?
Well, pretty much similar to that. I mean, this book took 10 years. And in part, I think it took so long because I really didn't mean to write a World War II novel. And then the further I got into it, the more I realized had just sort of jumped feet first into the abyss because there's so much information that you have to kind of take on. And also, I was writing 3 different stories and giving them together. In some ways, there were 3 separate novels. They were all sort of circling around the issue of war in ordinary life and what it looked like and what kinds of questions it forced. I wrote it, and it took a long time for it to get to an agent, and then still longer to find a publisher. And when I finally got it to Amy Einhorn, who is my editor, she said, I love it, but you need to write it completely over again. I don't know how, it can take months, a year, whatever it takes. And of course, in my head, because I'd been writing it for 7 years at that point, I thought to myself, a year? But in fact, I did. I rewrote it 3 times for her. And she very much saw the way to weave the 3 stories together. There was a lot more that had to do with Emma. I mean, much more with Emma and Will. And that really was the casualty of the editing. The way that it was written originally, Frankie didn't arrive until about page 150 and was much slower. But Emma had a lot more to do in that first draft. So she's a little bit of the casualty of the editing process. But
makes anybody wonder why they would want to write a book and go through the torture.
Well, when it's working, when it's great, there's nothing like it, just sitting there making up worlds. And then when you actually have characters that start to take off, it's so exciting because you don't know what you're doing. You're kind of feeling your way blindly, but listening to voices. And it's fantastic when it works.
Did the postmistress in Provincetown that you knew call herself a postmistress, or did she call herself a postmaster the way that Iris did?
Well, as far as I know, everybody really is a postmaster, and
Yeah.
It's Frankie who names her the postmistress, as you remember. I mean, she says, "Oh, well, in England, you'd be a postmistress," and then because it's Frankie who writes this book, in the conceit of it, that's why she calls it the postmistress, because Iris is very much at the center of her own dilemma. But of course, Iris is dead right. When I'm not sure if I wrote that in the back of the book, but when I was interviewing, in the very beginning of my process, I talked to a man who was the postmaster of a small town in Maine, and he said, "What's the title of your book?" And I told him, and he said, "I don't care whether it's man, woman, or baboon. There's no such thing." Then I just had to, figure out how to work my way around it and, how to have reality bend, because it was always going to be called The Postmistress. I loved that title, and I wasn't even sure what I was doing with it until sort of the end, but I had to figure out how to make it work. So
It worked.
thank you.
You piqued my curiosity. When I was reading the book, I found myself wanting to know more about Emma. Can you tell me a little bit about what wasn't in the book about Emma?
Well, the thing that was, the parts that were cut really had to do with the development of their love story and the ways in which she and Will were quite connected. I mean, Emma is a very important character, and she's difficult, too, because neither Frankie nor Iris's struggle really are active or real without Emma. Emma is the kind of third, pole, and she is the sort of, I had to make sure that she was as real as I could, because she's the one against whom both Frankie and Iris's ideals kind of found her. Frankie finds that she can't tell the truth, and Iris finds that she withholds a letter because they just can't face the actual presence of a woman standing in her doorway to whom they have to give bad news, and they can't. So the kind of abstraction of both of their jobs of delivering news kind of comes up against this small little woman who I feel is much, she's a strong character in my, I mean, the way I was conceiving of her, though I've heard many people feel that she's sort of wimpy and whiny. But I think that she's interesting to me because she's an orphan, and that's the character, that's the kind of quality that she had, this idea that she's invisible, that was very, that was compelling to me.
I have a question about your process. You have these 3 separate stories you had to weave together. How did you keep each thread kind of in the air or separate? Do you write them all down on a big piece of paper? How do you keep it all in your mind?
Well, it's a good question because I think that's the other reason why it took 10 years is because I was like, I couldn't keep it all in my mind all the time. I did have huge kind of pieces of paper on my study that on the one hand tracked what was going on month by month during the war, and as I started to understand how Frankie was moving and how long she was in France, and when I understood more and more the time period of the book, that was very specific, and then trying to track what Emma was doing at the same time, or Iris. But I got lost a lot. And but I think that's also just that is the quality of writing that happens all the time. I think that's the kind of thrill of it too, is that you really are flying blind. And I certainly was in this one. I knew, well, when I first wrote it, I thought, has everybody read the end? Because I'm going to do a spoiler. In the first few drafts, I had a whole, story about Frankie delivering the letter. And then she and Emma, they had a whole kind of relationship. She moves in. There was a whole different story. And I realized the more that I was writing it, that didn't make any sense to me at all, that in fact, the sorrow of it was that she found she couldn't deliver the letter. So that was a surprise. And I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about writing, is that, surprising yourself or scaring yourself and finding, oh no, the truth of this novel actually is not what I thought. So.
I'm wondering why you wrote Harry dying at the end. That took me back. A surprise, and I thought these 3 women are all alone now.
Yeah. Well, the really brutal truth of fiction writing is that some things just have to happen, and that was one of them. I mean, I knew that this novel was always going to end with Iris cutting down the flagpole. That was the image that I was writing towards. And in order for that to be true or emotionally true, I knew that Harry was going to die. So that was the one thing I did know starting this novel. Though I have to say again, the way that he dies changed many times. I mean, initially I had done so much research on the U-boats. I was really fascinated by the way the fact that U-boats were in so close to the eastern seaboard, and how long it took us to turn off our lights, and the kind of denial that we were in. But I knew that there was going to be a submarine plot, and for a long time I had a submarine docking or beaching on the Cape, and Harry confronting them, and then the more I wrote, the more I realized this is nuts, because I'm not Tom Clancy. So I had to kind of draw back from my submarine pretensions, and so Harry dies in a quieter fashion, but he had a much more dramatic end in other drafts. So.
When you did your research, how close did the U-boats get? I know there was one in Delaware Bay.
New York Harbor.
They got into New York Harbor?
Yeah, there's at the back, I think there's a description or a quote, but in January 16th, I think, so not long after Pearl Harbor, the first U-boat surfaced in New York Harbor, and simply watched everybody walking up and down, the headlights of the cars on the West Side Highway, and they could hear Broadway, they could hear the West Side, and then they went down again, they submerged again, and went out to around Fire Island, and then from there to Nantucket, and started to blow up merchant marines, and then from all of through January and February, and then into the summer, U-boats were getting merchant ships and convoys quite close in. I mean, there were there are accounts of people on the beaches in North Carolina who are watching, boats getting bombed and sunk. So they were quite close. And then it turned, the tide turned, as you know, in sort of July or August of that year. But there were 4 saboteurs who landed in Long Island in July of 42, 4 Germans, and they were, immediately captured. But so they were right in, and it wasn't until the end of the late summer, early fall, that the Eastern Seaboard actually started to have a brownout. But there had been a huge cry from the businesses from Florida to Cape Cod that it would harm their tourist industry to turn the lights off. So it was quite dramatic, I think, I gather.
I had an article years ago in Victoria magazine. I don't know if you know that magazine. And the article was about U-boat, and 2 Germans actually came up on the beach, and they had $40 in their pocket, and they were going to go up to New York City on a train and blow up the whole water system. But they never got to doing it, but that was their plan.
Yes.
You heard of that story?
Yes, that's who I was speaking of, the one that landed on Long Island, and right around July. Yeah, no, it was incredible, and they were, I think they were put on trial, and it happened all very quickly.
Oh, so it was Long Island, not Florida.
I thought so.
I talked about Florida Beach, and they were coming up on the Amtrak or whatever train coming up to New York.
Well, I know that there were more than 2 groups, so that there may have been one also in Florida. The one I know about is in Long Island. Yeah.
Can you talk about the cover, how you selected it?
About the what?
The cover picture.
Oh, I just was the lucky recipient of that. In a big publishing house, they have their own art department, and they found this image. It was a woman who's a photographer in England, who's, I guess there's sort of image banks. So they found it and put it together, and then showed it to me and said, "Here's your cover." So, but it's quite beautiful. There's the paperback in England and in the sort of English Canada, South Africa, has a photograph of a woman who looks very much like Kate Blanchett in who's supposed to be Frankie, who's on the cover, and there's photograph of a bomber above her. So that's slightly different and kind of great. Also, it's an imagination or a sort of stage rendering.
Is it going to be a movie?
Oh, that'd be great if you know anybody. Not so far. No.
When you said Kate Blanchett, it's beginning to fill in.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
How was it received in England?
Oh, very well, very well. It was on the bestseller list there as well, and it was. I went and had a little tour over there, and that was intimidating. I mean, I have to say that it is slightly frightening to come and speak to people who actually have lived through the war, who have memories of the war here in the States. But to go to England was even scarier, because I'd be speaking to people who had absolutely grown up in the Blitz or had lived through the Blitz, and it was a great relief to find that I had done my homework well enough anyway. And people said to me that the book sort of raised memories that they had forgotten, which is a huge, huge compliment. But I'll tell you one thing, I did not, when I gave my readings, I didn't try the British accents on them. That was too much.
I shared with the group that this had quite a personal appeal to me, because information had been withheld from my mother also. My father was killed in World War II 10 days before I was born, and it was decided that they would not tell her. the telegram was not delivered, mail was not delivered until I was about 3 months old. So it had a very personal impact on me.
Oh, yeah.
If you knew, did you base it on anything that you knew?
No, I just imagined. I mean, you tell a story that is, I mean, that is so full of pathos and you know, and sorrow. That was it. It was something I just imagined. But yeah, no.
People today don't realize that this kind of thing could have, or actually did happen, and could have happened during World War II or that era. And I said it wasn't a small little town; it was a city.
Right.
This happened in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it was very it was something I really wanted to dramatize or you know, think aloud about, this idea of what happens when we don't know the news, you know, the sort of gap, the kind of silence around before you know something, and what can grow up in that. I mean, it just seemed like very rich terrain to sort of understand emotionally what that would mean, and all kinds of questions that it raises. You know, when you don't have access to the news, we take it so for granted now, you know, that we can have something within minutes, you know. But this long period where things have happened and you don't know it, your life has changed and you don't know it.
Exactly.
So what's next for you, Sarah?
Oh, I am working on another novel now that's set on the coast of Maine, and it moves back and forth between 2009 and 1959, and it's 3 generations of the same family that are all on this big old house in Maine, and I'm really interested in the ways in which families echo or foreshadow each other, and how we're walking through the same rooms that our parents and grandparents may have without knowing the things that happened there that have altered, you know, our lives, and the sort of echoes. So, you know, there's a big story that happens in 59, and the characters in 2009 don't know it, but they're always sort of walking around it or over it. And I'm really interested in the 50s especially the late 50s, as this kind of tipping point before I feel like our country, the shift that happened in terms of class and race and the way in which the country sort of opened up seemed to have a kind of pivot point right there. So I'm interested in that, as well as the kind of secrets of families, the kind of tipping points in this family as well, when things kind of exploded past them.
And when can we expect this to come out?
Well, that is a good question. I don't know, you know, hopefully in a couple of years. Be great.
Great.
Yeah.
We look forward to it.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right. Well, I think that's it. And thank you so much again for coming and doing this. We really, really enjoyed hearing you talk about your book and also discussing your book. It was wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for all your questions.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.